Good morning, everybody, and welcome to episode 3 in our series of commentaries on the crisis Life Goes On. For those of us who are parents of children returning to school, congratulations, you survived. This series talks to HR and finance leaders who not only survived the crisis, but actually thrived in some way and continued with transformation and technology projects with really positive results and lessons that can be shared with our listeners today. I'm Zoe Avenel. I am Head of Marketing and Events at Around Performance and Chair of the Financial Services HR and Compliance Network. I've been supporting Tom Holmes and Becky Statham, our usual hosts of the series, with gathering insights from every sector over the course of the crisis. We have been focusing on how businesses have adapted during the pandemic, how priorities, projects and programs have needed to change, and then sharing these thoughts on webinars like this one, and also on our AI and automation series, our Reframing webinars, which talk about how the HR and finance service processes and systems need to be framed differently for the future. As well as our My HR Careers webinars that give tips and advice to aspiring and inspiring HR leaders. And finally, our Financial Services HR Network webinars, where we share specific industry best practice. For anyone who doesn't know Around Performance, we are a consultancy that helps businesses to solve their HR and finance problems and transform HR and finance from a people, process, data and technology perspective. So if you have any questions or need help with any of these topics, call or email me afterwards and I'll point you in the right direction. I'm really excited to be joined today by the brilliant Beverley Sorsby from Ropes and Grey today. Hi, Beverley.
Hi, Zoe.
Beverley is the HR Director at Ropes and Grey and a Director of the Network People in Law, which a few members are attending today. Beverley has a wealth of experience in the legal sector after previous roles at Charles Russell, Berwin Leighton Paisner and Dentons, and is passionate about strong culture, collaboration and sharing best practice across the sector. So Beverley, to kick us off, would you start by telling us a bit about Ropes and Grey?
Sure, thank you, Zoe. So Ropes and Grey is a US headquartered global law firm. My role is to implement global strategies at a local level, as well as help the London office managing partner to deliver the London office strategy. I'm a generalist, so my remit covers, everything from recruitment to strategy to service delivery, D&I, wellbeing, business partnering, and the whole spectrum.
Gosh, so pretty busy.
Yeah.
So tell me something that our listeners wouldn't know about the firm or a fun fact.
Well, I can give you a fun fact about myself. So I temporarily relocated to the northeast just before the national lockdown, and it turns out I've been here ever since. I relocated or sort of came back to my hometown. As I said, the national lockdown started and I thought I was going to be here for a few weeks, and little did I know I've been here nearly six months now. But of course I'll relocate back to London when we're sort of more fully back in the office, but for me that's not going to be till probably January at least.
Gosh, okay. And tell me a bit about the project you've been continuing despite the crisis.
Sure. So the project that I've been working on is to design and implement a new global recruitment website. And so that meant the whole revamp from a new vendor, a new platform, a new design and brand campaign, the architecture and everything. We started the project in July last year, so it's sort of late summer 2019, to be launched in July 2020. And we were partway through the project when we were hit with COVID-19.
Gosh, so what were the drivers to get the project going?
So for us, we essentially wanted to modernise the site and project a more global image, which was commensurate with our sort of relatively new international offering. So until around about 12 years ago, we were a Boston-led firm, but we've got 11 offices, including offices in Asia and in London. So when you looked at our current site through sort of from that perspective, it feels very US centric. It was quite clunky. And it was also written in the style of a client site, not for a candidate audience. So it was right for an upgrade.
Yeah, I'm sure many of our attendees today are familiar with those clunky outcomes. So what were the key outcomes and the benefits that you had in mind and the goals that you were targeting?
Yeah, so we were wanting to more broadly encourage us to, or use it to more broadly encourage us to evolve the messaging about the firm. So it would more accurately reflect who we are now. We also wanted to take the opportunity to have a more inclusive recruitment site, so bring graduate and entry-level recruitment, business support and fee earners all together, because in the current site they're in separate places. So it was nice to bring all of that in under one umbrella. And then finally, one of the main reasons, as I said, it was written in the tone of a client site, and recruitment sites should be used as a way to talk to prospective candidates. And allow a firm to share people's stories about what it's like to work at the firm and about its culture.
Yeah, that's so true. And how has it gone? Is it were there any challenges or surprises on the way?
Yeah, I mean, I have got to say the project has been absolutely brilliant. I have loved every minute of it, and there have been lots of challenges and a few surprises along the way. In terms of challenges, time zones are always a challenge. I led the project. I was based in London, together with a colleague who was based in San Francisco, so right on the west coast of North America. We then had a project manager who was based in Boston. The marketing and web team were based in New York, and then the vendor was based in Chicago. So it meant that I was working on the site quite late into the evenings, and my colleague in San Francisco was getting up really early in the morning. I have to say, however, working across time zones does have its advantages, because of course I was working on the project during my day, doing things, and then Dawn would get up in California, and I was able to hand over to her, and then she could hand over and continue the project whilst I went to bed. So yeah, time zones. I think one of the biggest challenges was the profile. So the profile, and so when I talk about profiles, I mean the personal stories of the people, because this is the design and the heart of the campaign. So we'd created the profiles that were stories that were going to be told in two parts. So the first was a photograph of the individual combined with an overlay of sort of illustrated words to visually tell their story. And then we were going to accompany that with a question and answer session, which was much more substantive information about the person and their life at Ropes and Gray. So that was the intention. We then had to identify the people to feature in the profiles, operating across 3 regions. So we needed representation from all of the offices. We intended to profile about 25, 30 people, but assuming a few dropouts. So we decided to run 2 photo shoots in the US, one in the New York office and one in Boston, and then one in London, and we'd fly over the Asian associates and lawyers to participate in the London photo shoot. And I have to say the photo shoots were really fun. It was a bit of glamour in a typically unglamorous HR job. So that was really good fun. I think the other piece about the profiles, it was really quite difficult to engage with the lawyers, because first of all, anyone that knows lawyers are always really busy. So getting time away to do the photo shoot in the first instance, and then asking them to spend time sort of producing and finalising the Q&As was quite challenging. And then they were operating in a vacuum, so they'd had the photograph taken, but hadn't seen sort of the end result and what the illustration was going to look like. So they weren't as sort of excited about the project as we were, but we got there in the end. Then I'd also say technical challenges. So I'd never worked on a website before, so I had to get used to the terminology. I'd often struggle to find the words to say to express what I wanted to say, because I wasn't used to the marketing jargon. So you'd have to say things like, well, that thing there, or what's that called? But I now know things to be, tabbed component or an accordion, or, referring to something that had an atmospheric background. These were just words that you wouldn't find in your day-to-day HR role. And then I think the other thing that I found quite challenging was when the vendor was building the site in the sort of background, and they were asking us to make decisions about the design and layout of the site without us having to see it. So Dawn and I are both visual people, so we preferred to be able to see what we were talking about. So that was quite challenging for both of us. But yeah, and then surprises for me, without a doubt, had got to be the buy-in for the design of the site, because what we've produced is a sea change from the current brand, and so I really thought we'd have difficulty getting it approved, but in fact everybody loved it, and you know, there was no resistance at all, which was fabulous.
Which is also very rare, I guess.
Yeah, indeed. And then any of the surprises? Oh, I think another was, so over and above the profiles, we needed to identify sort of other images and graphics. And it's not as easy as just going to a bank of stock photographs and thinking, oh, I really like that photograph, let's drop that in the site, because you had to make sure you had images that were consistent with like the tone of the site and it was cohesive. And that was more challenging than I thought. So was I would definitely put as a surprise. And of course, the design is very much about personal preference. So what I might like, Dawn didn't necessarily like, or the project manager. And you know, when you're in those situations, you either have to concede, or you have to say, well, I prefer this one for these reasons. And but it was pretty seamless, which was again great.
Yeah, it's like with anything, isn't it? You know, what you might like is different to the other people's taste. And you know, if you don't have a marketing background or you're not a visual person, I mean, we can see by your beautiful background on the fireplace that you are very have a good artistic eye. So that's great, and you can bring that to the table. But yes, it is a challenge to try and meet in the middle, for sure. We use we use the term reframing to capture the activities businesses are working through to reframe, reprioritize, replan, and make changes to timelines and objectives and scope and budget, etc. Due to the pandemic. How did you go about reframing this project when lockdown started, and what I guess areas remained critical to the success of it?
Yeah, so we were operating as a virtual team anyway before lockdown, so we weren't impacted by the remote working that had been, you know, necessitated by the pandemic. Like many firms, we were had to carry out a cost reforecast back in April. Very fortunately, there wasn't talk of postponing or halting the project or even reducing the budget, so that was great. The one element that was impacted by COVID-19, however, was the photo shoot. And of course, typically that had to be the main part of the project. So when COVID hit, very fortunately, we'd managed to do the first photo shoot in New York, and we were still able to go ahead with the London photo shoot. But the travel restrictions that were imposed because of COVID-19 meant that we couldn't fly over the lawyers from Asia. And we couldn't fly the lawyers that were in New York that were going to go and do the Boston photo shoot. And so that had significantly impacted on the number of people we were able to profile. So it went from the sort of 25 to 30 that we were looking for down to 16. And very, very fortunately for us, 16 profiles were just enough. I mean, it would have been a complete deal breaker if we couldn't get the photographs done, because of course they were the heart of the campaign and, you know, what we were using to connect with the audience. So it was very touch and go. I mean, we were really lucky in terms of timing, and I'm like talking about a matter of days difference between being able to proceed and you know, having to abandon the project because we wouldn't have been able to do the photo shoot. So, and I don't mind telling you, I'd have been gutted if that had happened, but fortunately we just had enough people. And the other lucky thing was, whilst we weren't able to fly anyone over from Asia, we did have someone from our Hong Kong office on secondment to the US, so we were able to profile him. So we still have some representation for Asia on the site. So So thank goodness it was able to go ahead. I mean, on the upside, we didn't use all the travel budget, and we therefore repurposed that money rather than saying that we repurposed it to make further technical enhancements to the site. So that was good. What else happened because of COVID? Oh, so we had challenges with resources. So we one of the project team was my colleague Keely, who is a HR communication specialist, and she was going to sort of lead on the content work stream. But again, when COVID hit, she was reassigned to work on sort of COVID related communications. So we had to quickly pivot and reallocate the resources. Of course, that meant Dawn and I had to pick up that work, but that was fine. Keely fortunately did rejoin the project when we needed sort of a proofreader and someone to again make the writing more sort of candidate user friendly. And one thing I would say is that COVID did have a positive impact on the launch date, because we were originally working towards the US campus recruitment schedule, which starts in July, which is why we had a target end date of July 2020. However, those of you who may know, COVID has completely disrupted the US examination system. So that has meant consequently the campus recruitment campaign has been pushed back to January. So we were able to sort of push back the target date in line with the London graduate recruitment timetable in early October. So we've gained a few extra weeks.
And did the drivers change as COVID now is coming into sort of September time change, or has it stayed the same?
So I think the drivers have stayed the same, but I think COVID, as we've now all come to appreciate, has really severely impacted people's ability to go and visit cities or businesses. So for Insight Days, for example. So I have to say, having a brand new, sparkling new website during a period of time when the sole route for people who are interested in working for a firm is to gain access via a website has worked out pretty well for us, thankfully. And so it's been really, really great, because one of the things that we get lots of feedback as a firm, that when people meet us, they really love us and love the people, whether it's in the US or here. And of course, now, unfortunately, because of COVID, they're not able to meet us, but we've got this new site that's profiling our people. So hopefully that will be do a good job of replacing that in-person experience. Certainly far better than what we started with. So it's been, you know, really great timing.
Mm. And with the objectives, did anything, as you were sort of going through your plans, did you identify any areas that you thought, actually, this is much more urgent, we need to deliver this much faster than we'd originally planned?
Excuse me. Yeah, so it's not that the project became more urgent, but I think the significance of the site, definitely became much greater when it became obvious that people's main route to seeing who we are as a firm is from a candidate perspective. In any event, is through this new website. So definitely the significance. I think. In real terms, in fact, as I just mentioned, it allowed us to push back the delivery date slightly rather than bring it forward. And as I said, that was some very welcomed contingency time. And so, yeah, so given the added advantage, the added importance, I've been very grateful to have those few extra weeks so we can make it as good as we possibly can make it.
Mm. And how do you plan to measure the success of the project? So now that we're sort of coming into, so you've launched it, it's all going hopefully well. And so how do you plan to assess if you've achieved your objectives and going forward?
Yeah, so from an objective measure, I think, it's about tracking the number of visitors to the site. It's about the number of direct applicants, because we were going to use it more for direct candidates. Less tangible measures are more feedback from candidates and recruiters, hopefully feedback from the market, because people will have a much better understanding of who we now are. And then I think for me, an objective perhaps, or a measure of success is comparing our new site to our competitors. Again, people who will know the legal market is very competitive, so you sort of need to be within the pack, so to speak. And I really feel like the new site means that as a firm we've arrived in that recruitment and candidate market, especially for training recruitment.
Absolutely. So what do you think you've learned from this experience? The project generally, I guess, as a whole, and adjusting the project from the pandemic. Do you think you've personally learned any new skills?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, it's been great experience. I know that and it's been really nice to work on sort of a proper project, a major global project. It's had a project manager that's got an external vendor. I think it's also a very high profile project, which, as I said, took on even greater significance during the course of the pandemic. So, and it's going to have a big impact both internally and externally in terms of, profile. So that's been fantastic for me to be able to showcase what I can do and make a significant contribution to the firm and raise my profile, which is great. I think it's always really nice to work with colleagues in other offices, as I said, working across multiple time zones. I think it definitely allowed me to develop on my, leadership skills, my listening skills, the teamwork and collaboration that's being needed in a project like this. And I was very fortunate to work with such a fantastic colleague, and we were both on the same page. We were both very passionate about the project, and which is definitely contributed to its success. So it has really been a fantastic experience, and I can't wait to start the next one.
And I actually think, everyone's sort of gone through their summer performance reviews this year. And I think, we talk about how businesses have had to adapt really quickly. I think as individuals as well, with our performance, we've had to adapt really quickly and learn new skills very quickly. And as you say, your colleagues taking on different roles and ownership of different responsibilities is it's amazing for our development, for sure.
Yeah.
And for our listeners on the call today, are there any lessons that you can share who are thinking about replanning their projects?
Yeah, I mean, anyone I think that's embarking on a similar project, I would definitely say building contingency time. You think you have all the time in the world and you don't. So certainly when you've sort of had a time scale like we had, which was nearly a year, you think you've got plenty of time. And certainly my experience, once you get over that hump, the finish line approaches very, very quickly. I would say be prepared for curveballs, things you're not expecting. We did not expect COVID-19 to happen, and it did. And as I said, as you said, it allowed us to sort of learn new skills and respond and react to the situation. You always think that perhaps things that are going to be straightforward or easy in the end are not, or vice versa. What perhaps you were going to think was going to be challenging turns out to be quite straightforward. What else? I'd say it's quite easy to let things slide, especially if the project's in addition to your day job. So you need to be very disciplined. I would say don't let challenges set you back, and keep going. I think there's sometimes when you might get stuck on something. Maybe what's the phrase, when you perhaps go down a rabbit hole, and if you get caught in there, you can waste quite a lot of time. So you just want to make sure that you're sort of decisive about things, make a call and move on. And I would say, be willing and flexible, and compromise, because it's about a team, it's about the project. So yeah, that would be my advice.
Yeah, I think it's important that you be confident with the decisions that you make, and I think everyone now is very okay with sometimes the decision that you make isn't going to be the right one always, but it can be unpicked and it can be rectified at a future state. So I think everyone's a bit more flexible with those decision making. And so with everyone sort of dotted around the world, how did you find and create confidence with yourself and also your team members that the project would be a success, given all the uncertainty and change that the pandemic brought about?
Yes, so definitely we were able to say that the product, the site itself is hopefully going to outlast the pandemic. But I think, again, ironically, the pandemic has shown how absolutely critical having a modern and up-to-date site is, because, you know, online is everything, like literally everything now. And so it's, you know, as I said, it's fabulous that we've now got a tool to represent who we truly are. I mean, arguably you could say that doesn't matter, but again, when we find ourselves in situations like this, and a website, a recruitment website now becomes the sole route to understanding, for a candidate to understand what it might be like to work in the organisation, then of course that site really does matter. And so, as I said, you know, we were frankly really lucky that we started it when we did, and so we now have, you know, we're now in a position where we've got this fantastic site. You know, of course, things are going to return to normal at some point, but, you know, that's definitely not going to be for this coming campaign. And so I'm really, feel really confident now that during this period, we've now still got a tool that during this period we can continue to recruit and project ourselves in the marketplace, especially to the sort of trainee and graduate market. So yeah, one thing that I did want to mention as well that I was also disappointed about was that it was our 10-year anniversary in London in 2020. Yeah, so we had so many fabulous things planned, and we were going to use the sort of 10-year anniversary as a platform to sort of elevate our profile in the London market. And a big part of that was updating the narrative, and of course that narrative now features in the sort of UK London region of the site. But we were going to have a in-person recruitment event and invite people in, you know, the recruiters, talk to them about the rebrand and the updated narrative. And obviously we can still launch the site virtually, but we were hoping to have a big fanfare. But we'll still obviously continue to do that, as I said, and update the collateral and send that out. So but hopefully we can do the launch properly in person next year.
Fingers crossed. It'll be 10+1. It'll be fine.
Yeah,
The marketing team will
exactly.
have that covered. So going back to the project and thinking about the stakeholders and the collaboration and getting everyone involved, were there any? You said that obviously there were a few hiccups on the way in trying to get stakeholders on board with everything, but were there colleagues who disagreed with the fundamental plan, and how did you go about getting the buy-in from everyone, and how difficult was that?
Yeah, I mean, we didn't really have anyone that disagreed with the plan or want to deviate from the plan, which again is you know, fantastic. We were still able to proceed. It was the design that I was slightly worried about in the beginning, but as I said, surprisingly, they really loved it. So, I mean, some of the stakeholders obviously did have views on sort of elements of the design or the wording of the content, but not in the plan itself. And of course, like I mentioned before, when you're in a situation and not everybody agrees, you need to sort of negotiate, work out a compromise. So you get to a point where everyone's happy with the result, and you can proceed.
Mm. And we spoke a couple of weeks ago with Shatali and Janet from the British Council, who also had lots of people everywhere on different projects, and they talked a lot about communication. And I wonder, how did you communicate the changes in the updates related to the project? Was that a kind of ongoing thing, or did you have weekly meetings, or?
Yeah, exactly that. I mean, communication is paramount. I mean, engaging with across a broad section of people on a project like this is critical. You've constantly got to make sure you're communicating with the right people at each part of the process, and especially when it's something like a website, and especially when you've got something like a design, because it becomes a point of no return. And you would be in big trouble if the senior stakeholders didn't like the design or the content that you're going to launch. So that the senior stakeholder buy-in is really important. We obviously had lots of stakeholders for the content, What we were quite clear about is that we didn't want to have too many cooks in the kitchen. And lawyers are very famous for liking to share their opinion. So we were trying to liaise with people to get the content, but then sort of keep them at arm's length to say like we'd do the rest, because we didn't want everybody having as I said, an opinion about the design. So that was quite tricky. And then in practical terms, we met as a working party on a weekly basis. We met with the external vendor on a weekly basis. We were in regular communication with the chiefs, who were the stakeholder group, because you need to make sure that they're happy with the direction. Are we on time? Are we sticking to the budget? We would then hold ad hoc meetings around, for the different work streams. When it got into the content stage, we were meeting every day for an hour for nearly 2 months, getting the content in and making sure it was right. So it's been a very dynamic process, and especially because we've never done it before. So we were, learning and reacting as we went along. Mm.
I think you're putting me to shame here, Beverley, because I go with the theory that beg for forgiveness. So just kind of do it and then hope that it's okay. But I personally am learning a lot from you, so this is great. So moving now, looking into the future, and what the future holds for your firm and, of course, the legal industry in general. Are there plans for subsequent phases to this project?
Yeah, so we're gonna be doing a soft launch in October for the London graduate recruitment cycle, and then a hard launch in January. Hopefully, we're going to be able to secure more budget for next year, so we can do some more associate sort of lawyer profiles. And I'd love to build out the business support section and be able to profile sort of our business support professionals as well. And then also we haven't got any videos on the site at the moment, so hopefully again next year we can create some videos as again another way to tell people's stories. And what it's like to work at Rose and Grey. And the other big thing I'm hoping is that we use this as an opportunity to start evolving our social media presence as well.
And presumably this ties in with your kind of long-term plans and objectives.
Yeah, I mean, the firm's strategic goal is to be seen as, global law firm, and hopefully the site will allow us to present ourselves as that, as well as help us attract the best lawyers in the world.
It's a tough job indeed. So, do you foresee any permanent changes to your organisation and perhaps in the industry as well?
Yeah, for me, I think the pandemic has thrown into very sharp relief the traditionally very thorny question of making agile work in law firms. Often says lawyers do well in a crisis, and so far I think the industry or the sector has done well, or at least in terms of corporate commercial firms. We've held up so far. Because the deal flow's there, it's meant that lawyers have been forced into remote working because of the client demand. And again, it's been an ongoing debate. Partners haven't wanted to do agile working where everyone else has. So it has been fascinating to see that where there was resistance before, it's been forced into this sort of resourcing model, and lawyers and support services have continued to service the clients. So it has been fascinating. I mean, going forward, and when it returns to more normal, I mean, we'll see how deep the resistance goes. Some firms have already started, announcing sort of significant changes to their working models. Linklaters have just announced 20 to 50% remote working. So we'll see. But I do think the longer the pandemic lasts, the greater the softening of that long entrenched resistance. So maybe I'll be working in the north for a while yet.
Yeah, actually, People in Law, the network, are hosting an event in a couple of weeks' time to talk about balancing working from home and people working from the office, and the impact that might have on career development and the long-term perhaps impact on partners working remotely as well. So that should be an interesting event.
Yeah, really looking forward to that.
Yeah, I'm not plugging it for them, but you know. So what's the most positive change, do you think, that has come out of the pandemic?
I mean, I've really liked hearing stories about people spending more quality time with their families. You know, that has been really, really lovely. I think also people have learned new skills, particularly around new technologies. I mean, my personal opinion, I would never have thought that you could sort of translate a physical in-person event, whether that be, you know, an awards ceremony or a careers event online, but it turns out you can. So, and as I said, people having more time with their families and working from home and having a bit of balance. But I think even with alternative resourcing models and the technology there to support it, I don't think there's ever going to be sort of one or the other. I think the future is a blend of in-person and virtual, whether that's work or whether that's events, and you know, I think that's a great balance for businesses and its people.
Absolutely. Well, gosh, time flies. That actually brings us to the end of our webinar. Thank you so much, Beverley, for joining us and for sharing your positivity and encouragement. So a few sort of tips that I've taken is build in contingency time, be prepared for those curveballs, keep going no matter what, and of course, probably the most important one is be flexible and willing to compromise, I think, are the key learnings from that. Our Life Goes On series runs every other Thursday, so join us again on the 17th of September, where we'll be talking to Ralph Tribe, who has been the HR Director at Sky and BT, and more recently the Chief People Officer at Essential. But in the meantime, thank you again, Beverley, and have a wonderful rest of the day, and we'll see you all very soon.
You're welcome. Thanks, Zoe.